Welcome to Mysterious Universe, Season 31, Episode 9. Coming up on the show, we've got the glittering sun pillars of Karelian, when you were a fat whale in a past life, and the flying playboys of Tibet. I'm your host, Benjamin Grundy. Joining me is Aaron Wright.
Is that a euphemism, or you actually were a fat whale in a previous life? Not you particularly, the story.
It's one of the Buddha's disciples, and he was really fat, like way fatter than the other monks, the other disciples. And he could never keep up with them. Like, he's always lagging behind. He's always heavy breathing, even during meditation. And the other monks used to make fun of him. And one day they actually went to the Buddha, according to the story, and they said, why is he so fat? Like, he tries everything. He can't lose weight. And the Buddha said, actually, in a past life, he was a giant sea serpent. And he was so hungry, he just couldn't stop eating fish. And so because of that past life, which was his direct life before this one, he's basically still like a hungry whale.
I mean, we all have our crosses to bear, but that's pretty horrible.
And then apparently none of them believed him. So the Buddha like grabbed one of the disciples and flew him to like a desert island, like levitated in the air and flew him like Superman to a desert island and showed him these giant bones of a sea serpent and said, look, there he is. That's his old body.
So I take it these are stories from the Flying Mystics of Tibetan Buddhism, this beautiful book.
Yes.
It's a nice little... It's a beautiful coffee table book.
By
actually.
Glenn Mullen. We got the hardcover. It was really hard to find that book.
Yeah, you were saying, and this is a second-hand copy.
So I was interested in getting a hold of this when we covered, it was a couple of months ago now, They Flew, A History of the Impossible by Carlos Ayer. And remember, that had the stories of the levitating nuns.
That's right, yeah.
And there's Joseph of Cupertino in there as well, of course, and the saints, Padre Pio, the saints who could levitate in the Western tradition. But of course, there's a rich tradition
that looks rather provocative.
Don't show that on the camera. We'll get banned from YouTube.
The YouTube algorithm will pick that up. No, it's art. It's religious art.
Yeah, and of course, there's a rich tradition of flying.
And apparently filthy prostitutes making weird sexual movements with demons.
That's why I said the flying Tibetan playboys, because we'll get into this, because eventually... they have all these stories and artwork in the book of these flying lamas. It's all based in Tibet, obviously. But it's almost like, it's just like flying with a woman while having sex is the general gist of what happens. Like most of the stories.
Say gist in reference to that.
You know, I've spoken about this before where people are like, oh, Tibetan Buddhism is so amazing and mystical, and like the Dalai Lama is so...
No,
they don't understand how dirty Tibetan Buddhism actually is.
Filthy. It's like raunchy, degenerate sex.
It's a sex practice. Like it's sex magic.
Yeah.
It's like Aleister Crowley stuff just wrapped up in Buddhist terminology.
It feels better because it's Buddhist. And no offense to Buddhists, right? I'm not saying that all Buddhists are horrible, filthy, degenerate sex monsters. But there is an element of it. And there's that dark side of Tibetan Buddhism, right? And it's not just sex. Like it actually becomes like demon manifestations, and there's even references to like demonic possession and all this kind of stuff that comes up. It's really, really terrifying.
Well, I remember back in 2014, you were on holiday from the show. You were taking a couple of weeks off, and it was just Wendy and I. And there was a Tibetan Lama in town. This is in Sydney, and he was having an event.
Oh, I recall. Didn't he show you? There was some particular is it a fairground or something, or like a group of Tibetan demons? Like maybe I've gotten it wrong, but
I don't know what you're talking about. But it was at this lady's house. It was at this lady's house in Sydney, and that was the general demographic of the crowd, was like middle-aged white women sitting around listening to this Tibetan Lama who couldn't speak a word of English. And Wendy and I are just being super polite. Like, we had to beg them to let us in, right? Because when I said I do a podcast, they're like, first of all, what is that? And no, you're not coming in. But we had to be really nice to get let in, very polite. We sat down. There was about maybe 10 people there. And this Tibetan Lama, I can't remember his name, but he was from Tibet. He was, or from Nepal, sorry. Obviously not from Tibet because of the political situation, but...
Was he like a dissident or something?
He just sat down and lectured for like 3 hours, but he couldn't speak English. And he was just reading from this Tibetan manual. And he's just like, and we all had,
so what were you doing?
We had versions of it And we were trying to follow, like we had translations, like we were trying to follow. But after about 10 minutes in, I just look at Wendy, she looks at me, we just go, what is this? But we couldn't leave because it was too impolite. Like the whole setup.
Like you or I go to a conference and like we time us like leaving because there's a massive hall.
It was worse than that because it was so intimate.
That's what I mean.
It's because we were in there with like 10 or 15 like women in their 50s who adore this man. And we're meant to be the serious journalists, and we're just like looking at our watches, like, get me out.
Probably got out of there in the right amount of time, though, because the wax paper probably came out after that.
Well, eventually for that episode, I remember because we got no content out of the evening, obviously, because we couldn't understand a word he was saying, other than a funny experience story. But when I got home, I remember I got to do some research for the show now because that was a nothing burger. And I ended up picking up this book, The Taming of the Demons by
How appropriate.
Jacob Dalton, which goes into the history of Tibetan Buddhism and especially some of its dark connections to Bon shamanism. And this guy outlines remnants of human sacrifice.
Yes.
Where the rituals, they don't do it in the religion, but the rituals from the shaman times are still apparent, and it's this like use of skulls and blood, and that's before even going into the whole tantric sex practice.
Well, looking at even the imagery of the cover of this book, you've got what appears to be some type of perhaps a demon being, and it's got like it's being skewered with swords and arrows and other weird items. It's
they channel demons, like to
control them.
They visualize deities, but also dark entities and demons. And the whole idea is that you're, I guess, channeling the power of the entity for some kind of spiritual gain. But if we were looking at any other religion, if it wasn't glossed up as this Tibetan Buddhism, you would just say, okay, well, this is demonic.
Yeah.
And I remember doing that episode and afterwards thinking, I feel a little bit guilty. Like it's a pretty harsh review of some of the so-called secret practices that aren't really shown to the public. And I remember doing that episode and just thinking, that was a bit harsh. Like, this is just
wrong with that, though. Like, why would you feel bad about that?
If you focus in on aspects of a particular belief system that aren't understood by the general public, of course, to any outsider, it looks extreme, it looks crazy. You could say that of any religion. So anytime there's that kind of really razor-sharp criticism, I don't want it to paint the whole belief system in a bad light.
But
you can say that of anything.
But any rational, normal person knows that as well. Like any rational, untriggered person knows that religions have evolved. Some haven't, but a lot of them evolve and change, and that's where they get rid of these certain practices.
Well, that's why when I grabbed this book, what is it? The Flying Mystics. I just thought this is gonna be my redemption path.
See, that's where you made a mistake.
And it's just like it's literally like OnlyFans, 11th century OnlyFans flying, but they're flying through the air. Like imagine your favorite OnlyFans model, but flying through the sky.
Yeah,
that's basically what's coming up.
I was mistaken. You and Wendy did cover this, but it was the Buddhist hell gardens of Thailand. And if you recall, that's the anthropomorphic, like statues. And it's horrible. Like, it's really, I'll send you this. Just scroll down. Here you go,
sending me something on Telegram.
Just send you this on Telegram. Scroll down to probably the first image that comes up. That's not an ad.
Well, it's Telegram, so it'll take like 10 minutes.
Oh, I see.
Come through.
It's not the image. No, I just sent you the link. If you just click on the link and scroll down.
That's the show notes for the episode.
Yeah, right.
And I remember just being like, that's his name, Lobsang Tendar. And it had the therapies and I had all the nice links. Then he got to the plus extension and it was just like, just hammered him. I always felt bad about it.
Feel bad about it? Click on that link. See if you can bring that image up. This summarizes it for you.
Which one?
The one I just sent you. The
Atlas Obscura. Let's have a look.
So just scroll down a bit.
Morbid Monday, the Buddhist hell gardens of Thailand. I got no problem with this. What's wrong with this?
Scroll down. Keep going. Keep going. There you go.
Yeah, but that's hell. It's depicting hell.
There you go.
That's supposed to happen in hell. What are you talking about? Yeah, I've been to this place.
Have you really?
I think so. Yeah, I think my wife, maybe not.
There's a few of them around, apparently. So this is just one of
I like how they're sticking to tradition and the alien from the movie Predator is there.
Very traditional. What a great thing to follow.
What have you got coming up?
Oh, I don't even know now after that. I'm so derailed by the Buddhist sex practices. No, see, I'm going to go into, as I pointed out in the last show, I was going to cover these strange stories of people being paralyzed or shot at by UFOs. But it kind of actually led into this really strange story that I picked up from the former Soviet Union. It's not linked to Paul Stonehill, of all places, for the first time. I know, very surprising, because I love his work. But no, it relates to an author, Dick Schwartzberg. And I've covered some of Dick's work in the past. I think he covers more high strangeness kind of stuff.
Classic Schwartzberg.
Very much so. But he covers this story, actually, that kind of ties in with these strange triangular, glittering sun, phenomena that occurs around the world. And it generates something very strange, which may link in with the program right here in Australia.
The alien abduction program.
Right here in Australia.
Really?
Yes.
The glittering sun pillars of Corellian.
Yes. We'll come back
Isn't
to
Corellian like a starship from Star
No,
Trek
Corellian, it's a former capital of some Soviet town somewhere.
Oh, okay.
Soviet province. But that's all changed now because these stories come from 1969 is this first one. So we'll go into that a little bit later on. But let's jump into this book.
Yeah, this is it, The Flying Mystics of Tibetan Buddhism by Glenn H. Mullen. It came out in 2003, but again, hard to get. Had to get a used copy. And it came out in conjunction with some art exhibitions, because it's full of these beautiful prints and reproductions of plates from the traditional art.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like I said, I first came across this when I was looking at the book on the history of the impossible from Carlos Ayer, They Flew, which had all the cases of Western monks and nuns levitating and flying.
Well, that's what's great about these sorts of things, though. It demonstrates that this is a phenomenon which is not specific to a singular religion.
Yeah, it's all over.
Practice,
of course, it's all over. And that's what probably would lend some people to say it's a real phenomenon and not just trickery or stories made up over time. I think that's the case in the Western tradition and, of course, the East. But we love these stories, and I'm a sucker for Eastern stories, as you know, if you've been listening to the show for a while. I love these Tibetan stories especially because they're always kind of funny and extreme in very weird ways. And there's a bit of a hat tip to this from Mullen, because in the introduction to this, he dedicates it to Helena Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy. He dedicates it also to Alexandra David Neal,
who was hanging out in Tibet in the 1930s.
Yeah, magic and mysticism in Tibet. She wrote about the tulpas and
they're magical practices.
What else did she write about? The
Lungom
runners who could travel vast distances in giant leaps,
like all sorts of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Yeah, and she dedicates it to Lobsang Rampa, who is the Irish guy whose body got inhabited by a Tibetan Lama, according to the story. So you know the story, right? Lobsang Rampa. It's supposedly a Tibetan monk arrived was it in the UK or in America? And he got hit by a bus. And he basically wafted around in spirit form and found this Irishman who was about to die anyway. Like he was going to get sick in a couple of months. So he took over his body and became Lobsang Rampa and published, 5 or 6 books.
Basically, it's the prequel to Free Jack.
What's Free Jack?
With Emilio Estevez, where like people from the future, right when someone's about to die, they steal their body and then
I haven't seen that movie.
You haven't seen? It's like an 80s film. But it's
Free Jack.
Yeah, Free Jack.
Is it as good as Time Cop?
No.
Okay.
No. It's all right, but it's not as good as Time Cop.
So it's not a masterpiece.
It's not a masterpiece. It's like a sub-masterpiece.
It's not Kino.
It's still all right.
So what I liked about Mullen's writing throughout this, because again, it's just a lot of art with little stories. He has personal experiences as well, because Mullen's lived and studied in Tibet under some of these masters. Actually, sorry, again, I keep making that mistake. Not in Tibet, because the Chinese communists
Nepal
took over in Nepal and in the Himalayas in India. This was 30 years ago, he said, which would be, because this came out in 2003, so the early 1970s. He said, I was studying Tantric Buddhism with the Lamas in the refugee camps of Himalayan India. And he said, I became a student of a master by the name of Gakpa Yeshe Dorje Rinpoche, who was known as the Rain Stopper.
We need that right now.
Yeah, it's pouring outside.
Hear that in the audio.
His most famous client was the Dalai Lama. And Mullen says that, look, whenever the Dalai Lama was scheduled to give a teaching or an initiation somewhere, he had something scheduled, he would send this guy, the Rain Stopper, ahead of him just to do his spells and wizardry to make sure it was perfect weather. And traditionally, he said that the Dalai Lama would have 3 of these guys on the payroll. So they would always be controlling the weather for certain, advantages for the state, or, if he was traveling somewhere, or if you just needed some sunshine or some rain.
And this is why they're such a global dominant power now.
Yeah, that's right. He would accept simpler contracts, though, for more ordinary folks. So when the Dalai Lama didn't have any jobs for him, he got contracted by the local construction companies. So they would hire him. If they're about to lay all this cement, they would hire him just to make sure there's no rain. But then it wasn't just that. After they'd laid the cement, they'd pay him a little bit extra, like he had a little bit of an extra fee, and he would make it rain, but just enough so that the cement wouldn't crack. So just like a light sprinkle in the afternoon so the cement would stay nice.
And was there any verification of this? Like, did he actually do it?
Well, yeah. I mean, you would think that if it didn't work, why would he still get paid? I mean, this is the Dalai Lama. This is like, they run the state. They used to run the country, and this is spending from the state coffers. So you could imagine if they weren't doing their jobs, they wouldn't get paid. So he was known as Gakpala, the Rainstopper Master, and it turned out this guy was the 5th incarnation of a famous flying mystic from the mid-17th century. So he was one of Tibet's 3,000 tulkus, and tulkus are the lamas that reincarnate. Mm-hmm. So, and apparently they organize this. So they have to set up their future incarnation and give some indication of like, oh, I'm going to be over there. Like, I'm going to reincarnate in Melbourne. Come and get me. He
really want to clear karma.
Yeah, he'd been discovered and recognized as such when he was only 2 or 3 years old, and his official incarnation name was the Winged Lama. So how did he get the name, Winged Lama? Well, the story goes all the way back to 1650. And at the time, the Mongols were marauding through Tibet, and, they would raise the temples and steal their holy treasures and whatever they could, loot the temples. And at the time, most Tibetan homes and temples and monasteries, they were encircled by this high wall to try and stop the raiding. But on this particular occasion, again in 1650, the Mongols had surrounded the Lama's hermitage and they had it under siege. They were ready to make their assault. And suddenly, one of the Lamas stepped up on the roof of the hermitage. And according to the story, he just lifted up his arms and flew into the air. And he started circling the Mongol camp. Like, they describe his robe flapping in the wind. He has this white robe on, and it's flapping, and he's circling around faster and faster.
I hope he's wearing underwear.
No. Everything's flapping around. That was part of the effect. And they say in the story that he was like casting spells. Like he was
what kind of spells?
Like mantras to try and stop the army. But I think he was just like, fuck off, fuck you.
No, that would be an Australian Tibetan Lama.
And apparently the Mongol army was so blown away by what they were seeing and so terrified that they all prostrated before him, packed up all their spears, and went home. Now, obviously, word got to the Dalai Lama. I think he was like the second. No, it must have been later, like the 5th Dalai Lama or something. He doesn't have a painting of.
I was just looking for that. Yeah, I was like, oh.
The 5th Dalai Lama heard about this and ended up giving him the name, the Winged Lama, and proclaimed him to be a national treasure of the country, but also told him, okay, you have to be one of these tulkus now.
Oh, okay.
So you actually get instruction. It's like, all right, you're now a national treasure of the country. We have to know where you are for the next 100 lifetimes. And I think this
do they predict it?
Yeah, they have to plan it out. Like the person who's proclaimed as that, it's their responsibility to line up their next incarnation.
But how would you even know? Because you wouldn't know the name of the person or...
Well, they're spiritually adept, so they know a general area. They give signs of how they'll be selected, so they have this foresight of their next incarnation, apparently. That's the pressure that's put on them. I think this is a big responsibility.
It's a huge responsibility.
Like, what if I don't want to come back as an Australian? What if I want to be, I don't know, like a Filipino or something? Okay, I can't say that with a straight face. What if I want to be a New Zealander?
Oh, Ben, no.
But no, you got to come back as an Australian for like 100 lifetimes.
That's fine. I would come back as Australian 1,000 lifetimes before I came back as a New Zealander.
I was testing you. I was actually testing you. You just passed the test.
Yep.
Aaron just passed the test, everyone. He's a full-on nationalist. So Mullen studied under this guy in 1972. And again, this was the 5th incarnation since that event. And he had maintained his memory of this event through his incarnations. So there's many other examples of these weather masters as well. You know, you mentioned earlier, is there evidence of this? One of the best cases was from David Barker. He's a Western anthropologist, and he was in Dharamsala, India. This is back on March 10th, 1973. And he claims he observed a Tibetan priest shaman, Gunsung Rinzing, stop a rainstorm to permit a festival of mourning. And the shaman, he basically built this huge fire, recited these incantations and concentrated mantras for 20 hours in front of this thing.
It's fascinating that he lit a fire, because in other cases that we've heard, and I think it was with the American Indians, with some of the stories of their, rainmakers and rain stoppers.
Who was the Native American guy that used to do that all the time?
I can't recall his name, unfortunately.
Bighorn or something?
Yeah, something like that. But he was, in those stories, though, what do they always do? They light fires. So I'm wondering if they're onto something, like maybe releasing, I don't know, carbon or something stops the local, I don't know, does it
really
disrupt something?
You're really going for the mundane scientific?
No. Well,
maybe it's the molecules of the smoke.
Well, I'm just wondering, like, is it that there is, like, that's a constant amongst these stories? Is it that they've somehow worked out, like, without realizing that it's a scientific basis?
Well, there's an interesting comment from the anthropologist. He said there was something about the air afterwards that felt artificial.
Mm-hmm.
His exact words were, the rain suddenly diminished to a drizzle, and by 10 o'clock, it had become only a cold fog over a circle with a radius of about 150 meters. So his point was that everywhere else was pouring down with this monsoon-like rain. But in this little area where the ceremony was, nothing, just a bit of fog. But he said the atmosphere had an airless quality, and he felt disoriented for weeks afterwards. Like there was something,
that's different.
Something strange about the air. So who knows what that is? Like if you want a scientific explanation, negative ions
I believe in reincarnation and a lot of the crazy stuff that we talk about in this show. So I'm not just dropping into this whole materialism thing, but I think it's something that potentially should be entertained. That, is it that, like, it's superstition or it's magic? So not magic, but it's like it's science masquerading as superstition and magic because we just simply didn't understand the mechanism.
I don't see how, because he's just lighting a fire.
Yeah,
there's no device or anything.
Yeah, and every time you light a fire, you don't get rain. So that doesn't. Yeah.
He says another one of my favorite Tibetan gurus in India was the late, great Serkong Senzab. The latter part of his name indicates he was a tutor, and he was actually a tutor of the Dalai Lama. So Serkong Rinpoche was one of the humblest and most down-to-earth people I've ever met, and he basically lays out some of this guy's history to say, this guy doesn't lie, he doesn't make up stories, he doesn't exaggerate, he's just a straight shooter.
Calls a spade a spade.
That's right. And he said, at the time, a Western Buddhist nun was visiting with 2 other adherents with her to talk with this guy. And during their conversation, apparently one of the women described a famous kite festival they have in Tibet and asked this guy...
Is it where they tie a string to a llama?
Well, I don't know. It's just like a random question. Maybe she's just making small talk, but... Mullen says that maybe the translation wasn't good because the guy didn't really seem to understand the question, but the way he answered was intriguing. He said, no, I never saw kites fly, but I did once see a man fly. And apparently the Western nuns are like, what? What do you mean you saw a man fly? Everyone's stunned, and he just looked at them and said, what do you, like, you're Buddhist nuns, you should know about this tradition. Like, the masters can fly.
Can it be hidden away, though, in amongst certain elements within the religion?
Well, obviously it's hidden away as in it's not demonstrated, but the knowledge of it, I mean, you look through that book and
it should be
all in the artwork. Mm-hmm. But he went on to tell this story. He claims when he was very young, so he was like maybe early teens or younger, he and his father were out taking a walk in the mountains behind their home. And they ended up seeing a famous local yogi step out of his cave. Everyone knew this guy had this cave and he'd been on this retreat for a very long time. 15 years this guy had been in this cave. So the people knew he was there, but the understanding was with retreats of that nature, obviously they don't want to be disturbed by regular people, so keep clear. So this yogi comes out, and part of his commitment was to never have face-to-face interaction with a layperson, right? That's part of the vow, the 15-year vow.
How elitist.
So he steps out of this cave. He comes face-to-face with these two laymen because he said obviously he wasn't a monk at the time. And he's kind of in this awkward situation because if he acknowledges them or even does anything like waves hi, his entire 15 years is for nothing because he's broken his vow. So they said they were looking at him. No one knows what to do. And he just goes, whoop, puts his hands up like Superman and flies into the air. Just flew away. And the nuns are listening to this story like, well, how is that possible? I mean, did he take a run up? This is what the Western nun asked. Did he take a run up and then jump? And the other lady asked, well, was there a puff of dust? And they look at her like, what a dumb question. It's like, no, there was no run up. There was no dust. He just raised his arms in the air and took off into the sky and disappeared.
Yeah, Gozer style.
Yeah, just like a Dragon Ball Z character or something. So that's why it's in the art, because these stories are rife in the tradition. Like if you look through all those pictures in the book, the flying mystics, obviously it's all got depictions of flying, but a lot of those artworks are just traditional depictions of, a Buddha or Maitreya or some kind of deity. But you'll always see it in there, like just off to the side in the top right corner, you'll see someone flying. It's just in everything. So he tells this interesting story, though, like he wanted to almost present this reality to the world, because in the 1990s, he was asked to look into the possibility of getting permission from the Atlanta Olympics to allow some Tibetan athletes to participate. And the thinking at the time, it was like a political move, and they kind of wanted to remind the international community that, hey, the Chinese communists took our country. So they wanted to have some kind of, I guess, event in the Olympics to
acknowledge
portray this, like this political activism. So he ends up speaking to the Dalai Lama about the idea. And he said, look, a few of the other guys have floated this idea. Why don't we get some of the lamas to participate in the high jump and the long jump? And the Dalai Lama's like, no way, that's cheating. They'll just win everything. Like he claims that they'll just leap across the entire pit of sand. He says, absolutely not. There's no way we can demonstrate that. And it's unfair. It'll be totally cheating against the other participants. So in the end, they weren't able to do that. They weren't able to get the athletes to do some kind of event in the Olympic Games. But they did put on an exhibition. So one of the things was some art people in Atlanta reached out to him and said, well, if you can't get the Olympics thing going, why don't you put it on an exhibition? And he ended up showing a lot of the treasures and artworks that had been smuggled out of the country. And this became a huge success, which is what eventually led to this book, because this book was part of an exhibition as well. So there's a lot of fun little anecdotes like that. It would be kind of funny to see like Tibetan lamas in their orange robes.
Yeah.
Like participating in an exhibition, long jump or something. I think that would be hilarious.
But you have to wonder then, why wouldn't they just, is it still obviously some type of guarded, like upper echelon secret? Is that why it hasn't been?
I mean, that's why you wouldn't demonstrate it. It's pretty, I'm surprised that he would even suggest that. I mean,
because you wouldn't bother, having a delegation go to the Olympics. You just do a demonstration somewhere.
Yeah.
And then that would be it.
It kind of reminds me of the transcendental meditation guys when they claimed that they could meditate. Not meditate. They could levitate. And then people asked them, well, why don't you demonstrate? And then they said, well, if you get 10 people together and they each donate $1,000, then we'll show you privately. And then they got the money together and then they're like, oh, we can't really do it. Maybe later. And then eventually they just hopped. Remember that from Transcendental Meditation? They just hopped.
Was that the same, though, as the ones of where there was like, I just remember this video of there being like rooms full of people and guys that were in the lotus position, but they were jumping in the lotus position.
Yeah, that's it.
Is that what that was?
Yeah. And I think a German newspaper ended up covering it by taking photos of them when they were in the air.
Right.
But when you actually saw the footage, they were just hopping back and forth.
But then I had to ask the question, right? Because obviously it is terrible what happened with the CCP and taking over Tibet and removing their freedoms. But surely this would be something which is so important to them to recover their nation and their place. Like, why wouldn't they just demonstrate it to the world? Like, imagine the attention that it would bring to Tibet and Tibetan Buddhism.
Because it's got to do with Buddhism in general. And there was, I can't remember the exact quote, but there was, I think I've actually got it later, where the Buddha said, leave that to the, like to the imposters, leave that to the grandiose performers. That's not what the religion is.
Yeah.
And it's not forbidden to demonstrate those things, but there's karmic reasons why you can't as well, which I'll get into in a moment. But he said, look, most Tibetans take these stories of the flying as, like, they take it at face value. It's just a reality. They believe that all humans have the potential to fly. In fact, according to Buddhist doctrine, everyone who accomplishes high spiritual realization attains numerous supernatural powers. These are known as the siddhis. However, not everyone who gets them will demonstrate them publicly. To do so requires the facilitating conditions of what the Tibetans call the Dulja Legi Trelpa Denpa.
I want to do it. I don't know what it is, but it sounds like something I want to do.
You want to do the Trelpa Denpa? Oh, you got to take your pants off. It's Tibetan Buddhism. Come on, get them off.
You have to do it with that underwear?
Yeah.
What is it? Actually, no, I don't. I'm actually more reluctant now.
What that term means is beings possessing the necessary karmic connections. So even if,
why are you taking your pants off?
I'm just joking. Oh. Even if you could levitate, even if you could float around, you could only demonstrate it to me if I had the appropriate karma.
Right. So it really is about a level. Like, you've got to be at the right level.
So yeah, you've
got to be like a platinum status member.
Not only do you have to be platinum status, but you got to make sure everyone in the audience is at least a gold member. Well, otherwise, they can't even view it. They're not allowed to see it. They won't be able to see it.
That makes sense.
So an example of this story comes from the 4th century, or an example of this principle comes from Arya Asanga. And Asanga took this lengthy meditation retreat, and his whole goal was to have a vision of Maitreya Buddha. And once he had that vision, his goal would be complete. Anyway, 12 years later, he's still going. And while taking a walk outside his cave, he ended up coming across a dog, and the dog had become infected with maggots. It had some kind of leg injury. And overcome with compassion, he takes care of the dog and decides to remove the maggots. Because he is a compassionate person, he also doesn't want to harm the maggots. So he's like, very gently, like one maggot at a time. There you go. Gives a little kiss, puts it down. Little maggot. Love you, little maggot.
But isn't there like a teaching in Buddhism about the monk that can't clean out the master's bathtub because it keeps on filling with ants?
There's a story.
And ultimately the master's just like, fill it with water, get rid of it.
Yeah, there's a story where the master says to his disciple, just go and clean the bathtub. And the bathtub's full of insects. So the disciple's like, oh, I don't know what to do. Oh, master, if I wash the bathtub, all the insects will be killed. And the Buddha's just like, dude, just clean the bathtub. And then he gets it. You find after like 2 or 3 times, he gets it. And the whole idea is that human beings have to have, dignity. And there's a certain level of decorum around being a human being. Yeah. And a bunch of insects,
you have to do things,
shouldn't get in the way. But not this guy. This guy is caring for the maggots, caring for the dog. And because of his immense compassion and patience, suddenly he falls into a trance, and he realizes that the dog infested with maggots is actually Maitreya Buddha, or an image of Maitreya Buddha transformed, like shape-shifted into the dog. And he realizes that he's now completed his goal. After 12 years, he's finally done it through this act of compassion. So he picks up Maitreya Buddha, who's now a man standing in front of him in his full robe. He's so elated, he puts the Buddha on his shoulders and runs through the local village, like proclaiming, like positive messages and being very happy that he's completed this mission and saying, follow the Buddha, follow the Buddha.
Is he just carrying a dog around his shoulders?
And people just see him with a mangy dog on his back because they don't have the
platinum status.
Trelpa Denpa. They're lacking Trelpa Denpa.
But isn't that a very easy way of like, oh my God, look, I have this deity that's come just to me. You might just see a dog. Like, it's because you're not good enough. Like, you're not good. You're just seeing a dog. But trust me, it's a deity.
That's what someone lacking in Trelpa Denpa would say.
And also a tricknologist would say.
Yeah, so that's what the chief tricknologist would say. And then they flew. Like, they basically, because no one could see what was really going on, they did see him levitate into the air. He flew to the heavens.
Okay, so their level was high enough to see something.
Yeah, they saw that. And then Buddha Maitreya gave him, I think it was 4 or 5 scriptures. And according to the story, those scriptures are still studied today in Tibetan Buddhism. So then getting into the powers, like these siddhis, there's 2 types of powers in the literature. There's the siddhi, or in Tibetan they're known as the gudrup, which is the really common mundane powers. And the second class is the exclusive powers, where essentially they say it's the realization of the ultimate nature of reality. It's like,
is that enlightenment though?
Yeah, it's like breaking through to enlightenment and understanding everything all at once, that kind of thing. So the first group, the common ones, anyone can achieve them. And that's why we cover stories all the time of these spontaneous things that happen in people's lives.
Out-of-body experiences, waking up floating above their bed, precognition, sending, distress messages to people telepathically.
Just a simple one, like you get a song in your head and then you turn on the radio and the song's playing. Or you think of someone and they call on the telephone. That's one of these common siddhis, one of these common powers.
Yeah, that have atrophied.
The sense of being stared at, like stuff like that. Everyone has these, but yeah, they're atrophied. But the point is, you don't need to be a monk or a meditator or necessarily spiritually adept to experience them. They're like default human abilities. But what about flying? Where's flying in this? Surely that's one in the second category. Surely that's one for the elites.
I don't think it would be. Because enlightenment is far superior to just simply flying.
You're right. It's a common one.
Yeah.
Everyone's got it. You could probably do it right now.
My sons are going through this at the moment. They're both like, why can't we fly? I'm like, because I've basically gotten down because I'm going through the Y phase. Like, So I've got down, do you have feathers, mate? Oh, no. Okay, you can't fly. So I'm terrified he's going to strap feathers to himself and jump off my balcony. But apart from that, I think he's all right.
Did you check their Trelpa Denpa? Might be a bit low. You've probably got to top it up.
Mine, so it's just
probably got runs in the family.
Yeah, it does.
So yeah, 2 types of powers. That flying is totally common. So they go through 2 of the 8 common siddhis are the power to fly, but also the power to shapeshift.
Yes.
So this is a real common one. The latter includes various powers, for example, the ability to expand and contract one's body. So pretty common one if you want to shrink down. You can even go to the size of an atom or expand yourself to the size of a mountain.
I almost said that would be convenient when flying economy, but you wouldn't be flying because you can fly yourself.
That's true. The power to walk through solid matter.
Yeah.
Totally normal.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us have experienced this at least once in our lives.
No.
Okay.
Most of us have it, not that.
The power to transform one's physical appearance. Look at that.
Cut your
You
hair.
can go walking down the street, see all sorts of people that look like they shouldn't. Just reading between the lines. You can see all sorts of interesting people appearing as things that they are not. Such as from a human to a bird. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. As a Tibetan monk that has somehow changed his form.
But one of the most popular common ones is known as the Fleetfoot Siddhi. That's how it translates. And this is what Alexandra David Neal saw with the Lungom and the monks that were like yogi.
They were bounding.
They were like
gummy bears.
Is it gummy bears? Yeah, gummy bears. They drink the potion and bounce there like that.
But vast distances. Like I remember it was like over mountains or, it'd be over a lake.
Kilometers at a time.
Yeah.
Just one leap and they'd disappear into the distance. And yeah, these were travelers and their feet obviously wouldn't touch the earth in many of these jumps. The achievement was sufficiently common in the early 1900s that the British government in India kept several of these Tibetan fleet-footers on their salary rosters.
Smart.
One British officer in India reported that a letter given to a Tibetan fleet of footer, that's what they called them, in Darjeeling, for example, in the morning, could be delivered to Lhasa by the afternoon. A journey that usually required several weeks of arduous travel. That same courier would return the following day with a signed and sealed response. Oh, I got to look up this reference. What are you talking about? The British are using Tibetan mystics as like a weird FedEx?
Well, in a day lacking in instantaneous communication, that would make sense that if you find people that have these abilities, of course you'd utilize them.
So I looked up the reference. This was mentioned by a British officer named Leyden, first quoted in 1935. And the author likened it to, it's not something you would use all the time. Like, it's not something you could rely on. The way he termed it was, think about how there might be a murder case and the police are desperate to find the killer, but their leads aren't going anywhere. So they might, without letting too many people know, go and ask a psychic.
Yeah, that happens all the time.
Right? Yeah, but it's not.
But it's not publicized.
It's not publicized. Yeah. They don't tell anyone. He's indicating that for the British, this was the same thing. It's like, Jeeves, we've got to get this message to Lhasa immediately. We've got to get there by tomorrow. And the only way they could do it was, okay, let's get this Lama in and send them on their way, which I just found fascinating. Apparently, the Dalai Lama was asked about this in the 1970s, about some of these abilities, and he replied to an interviewer. He said, yeah, of course these exist. In fact, the KGB was here yesterday asking us to train their agents, and we had to say no. Which is pretty incredible. A pretty incredible quote from the 1970s.
Because not only that, though, I mean, if this is what you were saying earlier, that anyone can utilize this, I wonder, did the British train people as well? Like, why would that, or was it always just kept to within Buddhist circles?
Well, I think it was, you'd hope it was kept within the tradition.
But it also makes you worry that these things are lost now.
Well, they are. So he claims that since the communists took over, all those great masters who had those abilities, like the couriers that the British would use, he says they're all dead now. Mm. And the younger generation that came through, who are obviously old now, they're just all scholars.
So what happened to the documents? Are there documents around, or did the Chinese destroy them?
Well, there's still documents, but he says that's the problem, is that there's no real practitioners per se of those mystical arts. He says they're all like academics now.
Right.
So they're desperate to keep the written tradition, but none of them actually practice it.
I'd like to keep some hope that there's some, inner circle hidden somewhere that's, fighting the CCP that still retains these abilities. Like
they won't let you in because you're Trengpa Dengpa.
Well, I don't need to get in there. As long as it's around, that's all that's important.
As long as it's there. So how do you get the power? Well, the Tantra of the Secret Gathering, one of their texts, speaks of 6 ways in which the special psychic powers are attained.
Well, the fact that you said Tantra means that...
So what's the most obvious way to get these powers?
Baking paper and human fluids.
No, meditation.
Obviously. Oh, meditation.
My God, get your mind out of the gutter. He's like immediately milking fluids, Aleister Crowley style, like jizzing on spell parchments. Well, obviously, you jizz on a few spell parchments if you want to unlock the abilities.
And light a fire, and then off you go.
You need 6 old women and plenty of Viagra. No, the first one's obviously meditation. Anyone achieving higher meditation will gain at least a few of these, just without even intending to. Clairvoyance comes first, with powers like reading others' minds, remembering past lives, and so forth. This is the first level. The second Dalai Lama, for example, there's a story of him. This is from like the 15th century. He went on a 3-week meditation retreat. When he came back, he could memorize almost half a book in 15 minutes because he had this unlocked memory. So there's stories like that in there. But as one's power of meditation increases, more abilities come through according to their tradition. Shape-shifting, telekinesis, levitation, and flying are retained. The 11th century Milarepa, for example, together with his disciple, once shrunk their bodies to finger size to hide from brigands in a yak's horn. I like that idea. That's how you escape the thieves. You shrink yourself down. But have you ever heard the Milarepa stories?
Yes, yeah.
They're amazing.
Yeah, they're incredible.
Like he when he first meditates
I think I covered one
for
years ago.
an incredible period of time, like he's sitting in this cave for years, right? And the way he survives is every now and then he goes out of his cave and he collects nettles. Like every 3 or 6 months he comes out and he just collects nettles on the cave hillside and then he boils them into a tea, and that's all
sustains him.
That's all he consumes for like a year. And it turns him green. So eventually his skin just goes completely green. So there's all these stories of some of the, like the mountain people just looking up and seeing this weird green reptilian looking guy coming out of a cave and then flying through the sky. And it's Milarepa. Yeah, there's good stories with him. The second source of magical powers is mantra practice. So that's like Rob spells.
Mm-hmm.
Mantras, right? You've got your repetitious, what is it? What would you call it? A spell?
Yeah, I mean, I use the word incantation before, but that's kind of what it is. Like, it has an intention. It's a magical intention behind it.
Through the proper use of a mantra, a yogi or yogini can achieve all sorts of abilities. And there's a story about Nagarjuna, the Indian master.
Sorry, what's the difference though? What's the
yogi and yogini, male and female?
Oh, okay. All right.
Nagarjuna, the Indian master, he would write mantras on these special leaves, and they were kind of like his Nike Airs. Like he would put them in his shoes when he wanted to fly.
Yep.
And then the mantra would allow him to fly. Apparently, in one of the stories, he traveled across the ocean to America by putting Rob spells in his shoes, which is a pretty good feat. The third source is channeling. So here the yogi or the yogini or the shaman channels a god or goddess into their body to acquire the powers of that being.
Yeah, this is the demonic possession stuff. Even though it's supposed to be a god, but some of the stories that we've read over the years, it's like they accidentally get a demon.
Yeah, like who knows what's coming through. Maybe they have the ability to discern, but maybe not.
Maybe that explains, those monks, those Thai monks, the Buddhist monks that get around in private jets?
Oh.
Have you seen that? Maybe that explains that. Is that supposed to be a pious, living in a state of poverty?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I don't think any of this stuff is in
modern
Thai Buddhism, in Theravada or whatever they call it. The fourth method is dream yoga, where the yogi cultivates lucid dreaming, and this also means separation of body and mind. So this is going into an out-of-body state. And Mullen said one of his gurus in India did the old Edgar Cayce trick, where he would put a book or a scroll under his pillow at night, and he claimed that when he went to sleep, he would leave his body and he would actually go into the pages, like send his spirit into the pages and absorb the information that way. Like he'd fly in between the pages. And
I wish I could do that in high school.
Oh my God, imagine just doing that now.
I know.
Prep time would be nothing.
Yep.
Just go to sleep, done.
That'd be great. All refreshed.
Don't have to read crazy books all day. Yeah.
I used to try listening to audiobooks as I slept.
Oh.
There's one of those terrible books like Looking for Brandy and The Crucible and all that crap. And I was just like, oh, God, I can't stand this. So I'd listen to it. I never learned any of it.
My friend bought me one of these memory training tapes when I was in high school. And we were meant to fall asleep to it, and eventually you would have this super memory when you woke up.
Did it obviously not work?
It was so stupid.
Yeah. What did it entail?
You had to, it was so dumb. It was all association. It wasn't even memory palace stuff. It was just like, oh, Aaron, apple. I like eating apples.
Yeah.
Picture myself eating an apple.
Yeah.
I'll never forget your name, Apple.
Oh, it's like that crap I'm doing in Japanese at the moment. It's like you're trying to remember breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So it's like asagohan, hirogohan, bungohan. It's like, the way you remember it is like A comes before B. I'm just like, oh.
Revolutionary new teaching method. Wow.
I'm just doing my head in.
And then the fifth method is one of our favorites on the show, which is taking DMT.
Oh.
Well, obviously not literally DMT in Tibet, but They take concoctions, they take hallucinogenic drugs. And so obviously you start to see how this isn't Buddhism. This is like this weird
Shamanism.
mix between shamanism and other things, kind of with this Buddhism veneer to it. So it's kind of complicated. And Mullen does make this reference to the similar practices in the Americas and other parts of the world.
Well, it does make you question, though. It just occurred to me, like, if these are abilities which are available to everyone under, like, what appears to be very limited kind of expenditure.
These are just the common ones.
Well, this is what I'm saying, but you go to like a meditation retreat for a week or so and you don't speak and all of a sudden, you can do these things. Why don't we see more of it with influencers? Like, there's so many influencers online that go off and do these meditation retreats. Like, they're not doing anything that's incredible.
Because they're extremely low in, what was it called? Trengpa Denpa, or whatever it's called.
Trengpa Denpa. Okay.
Trengpa Denpa. They're negative Trengpa Denpa.
They're just bringing it back up to normal.
Well, we're in the Dharma period. We're in the Kali Yuga, so everyone's like extremely spiritually retarded.
Right. Yeah.
And that's
why we're
a huge factor, I think. One of my favorite examples of obtaining these abilities was what they call karma seeds, or at least that's the translation. So the idea with this is, in a deep meditative state, you can look deep within your true self and discover things that you've unlocked in previous incarnations. So, for example, if in a previous incarnation, like 1,000 years ago, you were studying under some monk and you unlocked the ability to fly or levitate, that is sealed away in your very being. So think of it as like an object that you can unwrap. And if you find it...
So it's an Easter egg?
It's like a little Easter egg in your history of incarnations. And if you find that Easter egg, boom, immediately in this life, you have that ability again.
So do you access this through meditation, drugs? And how do you get to that? How do you look at these pharmacies?
I presume it's meditation. It's like activating the seed of memory, they say. Apparently, it's a specific technique.
Well, that's very, also, you mentioned Casey there, but that's very Edgar Casey in itself. It's like kind of like an Akashic record that's just for your particular soul, I suppose.
It could be very practical. Like, what if I was a plumber in my past life and I had a leaky tap and all of a sudden I just go, boom. It's like the Matrix.
Yeah,
You're
or
just downloading a new skill.
Yeah.
Like, you could unlock being an Egyptian temple whore. Because that was one of your past lives.
It was, apparently. Imagine the money I could make. I could stop doing this.
Could seduce any politician. You
know what? That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start doing that now. Just
start world wars. Just start revolution.
That would mean I would be possessed by a fox. That's a whole different realm that we'll go into another day.
No, just use your ancient consort skills. So these 6 methods are ranked. So obviously the first is the best and the second is the next, and so on and so forth. So clearly meditation is number 1. But unfortunately, he says not many Tibetan Lamas in India and Nepal today are especially experienced in any of these methods. And this is where he makes the case that those great masters from the country, from original Tibet, they're gone now, they've passed away. And the new generations are really just, they're academic. The sad reality, he says, is that the Tantras are studied superficially and only for auspicious purposes alone. So a lot has been lost.
But surely, I mean, I know I'm hoping a bit here, but surely there must be some group within the religion that's trying to keep it alive.
Well, ironically, he says the masters that still have these abilities never left China. They're still there.
Oh, what, as in detained by the Chinese or just hidden amongst
hidden and detained.
Right.
So for whatever reason, they didn't flee. And he claims he met one of these in Lhasa a decade ago. So this guy had been imprisoned by the Chinese Communist Party since the 1960s. But the funny thing about this story is he kept on escaping. The communists couldn't keep him locked in. And the reason for this is because when he got fed up, he would just literally get up and walk through one of the stone walls.
Well, if you got one of those skills, you're going to use it.
According to the story, he'd just like melt through the stone wall and just, go get a cup of coffee or something. And he kept on getting recaptured. And it got to the point where this was in Drupja prison, which is a maximum security prison. It has a massive interrogation center.
Oh, we can't begin to imagine.
And it is still used by the CCP today for political prisoners.
So like the whole, soaking people in water for days on end until their skin falls off.
It's infamous, this place. Yeah. And this guy was just walking out of there, like whenever he wanted. And so the prison officials and the CCP, like local government guys, they had to sit him down in a room and say, look, you're embarrassing us. Please stop.
There's nothing worse than losing face in Chinese culture.
Like, they had to beg him, can you please stop breaking out of prison? Like, pretty please stop breaking out of prison. And what this guy did was he said, look, I'll stay in prison for my full sentence if you agree to improve the conditions in the prison by doing this, 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 and this, and this. So I think it was a great story because it showed his selflessness, his compassion for the other inmates. He wanted to see things improve in there and was willing to sacrifice, his own life to stay in there. And he ended up, according to the story, he ended up spending 6 years in his cell and he never escaped after that. But there's an interesting story to how he survived, and it's kind of an extra protest. He went on a fast. He refused to eat anything. He went on like a hunger strike. But the guards that watched him claimed he used this technique where it was some form of yoga called extracting the essence from a stone. And it was kind of like he got a barocca and put it in a glass of water, but the barocca was just a pebble. And he would drop this pebble in a glass of water.
Is barocca Australian? If you don't know what barocca is, it's like an effervescent tablet of vitamin B.
Yeah, you put a vitamin tablet, but it's not. It's just a pebble. He'd drop it in this glass of water, and then he would start like casting S-Rob spells at the glass of water.
Did a naked monk show up?
I don't know what he did.
If it was S-Rob style.
And apparently, the guards say like it starts fizzing, and the stone eventually disappears, and it's some kind of technique to extract some kind of vital energy from the stone.
Well, that, what, in the light of things like psychometry or even panpsychism, more so panpsychism, that kind of makes sense, right? There's like a life force inside these substances.
Yeah, they claim he was able to transmute it into like a universal nutrient.
So it's like they're also, they're alchemists in a way.
Yeah, and that's how he survived for 6 years. He just drank delicious stone water.
You know what? That puts a whole new perspective, though, on those stories of these, lamas and monks hanging out, for decades on end inside caves up high in the hills. It's like, well, are they extracting their nutrients from something else? I know that, like you mentioned, nettles there, but are they somehow getting it from something else?
Well, I think that's called bigu, which is like
bigu, yeah.
That's like where it's some kind of supernormal ability where you just don't have to eat.
Yeah.
And that's what
you must be drawing energy from.
That's
something.
What Milarepa was doing.
Yeah,
but he still had to come out and get nettles, which turned him green. It reminded me of that rock sucking dish that was on social media. Did you see that?
No.
There's like this dish that went viral in China somewhere or Taiwan or something, where it's like it's not actual food; it's just rocks with chili. You never seen this?
No.
This one. It's like Chinese street food, and they just stir fry pebbles and put chili sauce on it.
Put a couple of shallots in it.
And you just suck the pebbles, and that's the meal. Like, what is wrong with people?
Well, we know what's wrong with people. Modern Chinese society is collapsing.
Is this the epitome of the collapse?
Absolutely,
is sucking on chili pebbles?
This is pretty much it. Well, look, they think their government's, helping them, so
$2.30
rocks
to suck on some rocks.
What did they throw lavender on there?
Delicious.
Oh, is that no, I'm sorry, that's like some type of lettuce.
What they don't realize is it's actually gutter pebbles. Like they're getting them, they're getting them from other pebble restaurants, and they're just like fishing them out of the gutter. It's not even fresh pebbles.
Isn't that in a way that's a representation of like the what's it called? Is it like mass hypnosis or mass psychosis?
Mass hysteria or something.
Like their entire society, that's how far it's fallen.
It's a fad.
Yeah,
right?
it's just nuts.
I guess it's like nuts. Chewing gum, like you're getting something out of it and then you're just spitting it out. It's a little bit like we chew gum.
But at least chewing gum, it increases your saliva levels, so it neutralizes acid. At least it's doing something.
You don't think sucking a delicious chili rock is going to produce more saliva? A delicious gutter chili rock?
Fair enough. That's fair. I'll give you that one, Ben. You can have that one.
So yeah, I like this book because he's got a bunch of funny stories. Like there's another one where he saw this guru who was giving a lecture and a bunch of people turned up with cushions for the meditation. And this guy just started laughing at them. And he said, we don't use cushions for our behind, we use cushions for our head in this class.
What, you're going to lie down?
No, the implication being you got to strap it to the top of your head like a helmet because you'll start floating and hit the ceiling. That was his implication.
Okay.
Just funny little stories like that. He has this whole section on the rainbow body, which we've spoken about before. He says every Tibetan has dozens of stories of masters of the past who have attained this state of body-mind where the physical body is essentially transformed. It's no longer restrained by this physical dimension. And, without going into too much detail, that's an idea of part of the practice is you actually changing the nature of the cells of the body. They're no longer of this dimension. They come from somewhere else. So they're no longer restrained by the physics of this dimension or the time space, for example. And they call this the rainbow body. And it's said that when that state is obtained, it's kind of like Star Wars where a Jedi dies, they fade away. It's like that.
And they leave a blue glowing mass behind.
Yeah, they don't leave a corpse when they die. There's like nothing left. There's nothing to bury because there's nothing left behind. Now, he points out that obviously they're very discreet about this practice and it's not demonstrated in any way. But over the years, some stories have leaked out and some eyewitnesses have given interviews as to what they've seen. And I think we did a whole show on this back
yes.
It would have been a couple of years ago now. I'll link to the show we did in the show notes. It would have been back in 2016 or something. Rainbow Body and Resurrection by Francis Tissot, where he went and interviewed a bunch of monks who witnessed this with their master. And I'll tell that story in a moment, but Mullen had his own version of this story. He said, one of my own gurus obtained this rainbow body status. He was 167 years old, this guy, he said. My guru was in his late 20s and in the middle of his third year retreat with, actually his guru was a disciple of this 167-year-old Lama. And
so he's obviously telling the story from years ago then.
Yeah. So one day this master said that, look, guys, I'm just going to go meditate in my cave and it's going to be a while. Make sure you don't disturb me. So the trainees accepted the injunction for the first 5 days, but then obviously they're like, what's the master doing? Like, we haven't seen him for a while. Should we go check on him? And they take a peek in his meditation chamber and it's like, clinically dead. Oh, no. The old man's body had transformed into the body of a youth. So this guy went from 167 years old to like a nubile teen boy sitting on the meditation. Now, I know there's plenty of chances of the old switcheroo here, but apparently it was him and he was glowing. Like his skin was perfect. He was clearly the same guy, but much younger.
Radiance.
He was radiating this rainbow light, but he was like clinically dead because they checked his breath, they checked his heartbeat, nothing. He wasn't breathing, his heart had stopped. But he showed no other signs of being dead. Like there was no decay. He was still upright, like his muscles were still strong in that position.
So he's like a incorruptible.
Yeah, it's very, very similar, right? So the group sat around him in meditation over the days that followed, and according to the interviews with them later, they said he gradually got more translucent. And eventually he was just this weird light sitting on the meditation pillow. And on the final day, they said there was a flash and he disappeared. So it really is like the Jedi fading in their robe, but it takes about 7 days. It's like a 7-day thing. They, of course, were sworn to secrecy and could mention this only to their closest students. So he said, look, my guru was the only member of that retreat cluster who was still alive in the late 1970s. All the others had been killed by the Chinese communists during the previous decades. He shared the story with me with the instruction that it could be repeated only after he had passed away. And he actually said, well, he wrote this in 2003. He said he died a decade earlier from lead poisoning because he had a Chinese bullet buried in his chest for years that had been,
breaking down.
So again, we covered this, and I'll link to the episode. It was 1503 where we covered this story. And this is Rainbow Body and Resurrection from 2016. The story in this one was Lama Khenpo A. Cho, who died in 1998. And it was very similar. There were 4 witnesses, 4 of his disciples that watched him pass away. And if you remember us talking about this on the show, there was all this strange activity, even in the building surrounding where he was in his chambers.
Yes.
Like there was this weird rainbow light in the sky. They reported hearing music that they couldn't find a source to. And they watched as he was 82 years old, this guy. His wrinkles disappeared. His face became youthful. He got smooth and pinkish. He had this incredible fragrance that they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. And they said, look, the body was shriveling. It was becoming smaller and smaller until eventually he disappeared completely. And I wonder what that looks like. Does he retain proportions? Like, does he turn into like
suggesting it's like Benjamin Button?
Yeah.
Like, is he aging backwards as well, or is he just...
Obviously, he doesn't turn into a baby, but does he become like a little dude?
Yes.
Like, could you...
Absolutely.
I know it'd be very disrespectful, but could you pick him up, like, in your hands? And he'd be like a little baby, like a little tiny master?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Isn't that obvious?
Yeah, obviously that's how it would happen. The complete disappearance was established on the 8th day, and then the body completely dematerialized. So multiple eyewitness reports of this. And I remember just being stunned by that book when we covered it, because it was such a great story with so many different eyewitnesses with this weird activity. And it's funny because they kind of plan it out too. Like they know exactly when it's going to happen. And he tells the disciples, he's like, you better keep July 14, marked on your calendar and make sure you're not doing something that day. And he's like, that's the day I'm checking out. So why are these stories so rare? Well, this gets to something that I was alluding to earlier. This is from the Buddhist tradition, where there's a command from the Buddha himself, which was allegedly leave public talk of personal experiences of a paranormal nature to those with delusions of grandeur.
Yeah, okay. That's very Buddhist, because it's about humility, like being humble and not,
Yeah. So if you're talking about these things publicly, demonstrating them publicly, in their eyes, you're directly going against the founder of the religion.
Well, isn't this the point, though, as well, is that it's not even about, even though that it is what's occurring, it's also about the fact that all of this stuff is like, essentially it's like a sideshow. Like what you're trying to do is you're trying to achieve enlightenment. You're trying to, raise yourself. And
That's
all
right.
this stuff that's going on, this is all human, attachments.
You're totally right. And these abilities are superfluous to the goals of the practice, which is to achieve enlightenment and a raising in moral and spiritual character. Even in the artwork, you will see that principle displayed. So in this image, for example, this is one of the artworks from the book. That's, I don't know which Buddha, one of them. But you'll see off to the side, like on the periphery of the painting, obviously he's the central piece.
You can see that radiance around it too.
Yeah, he's got the halo. Yeah. But off to the side, see these little guys flying.
Mm-hmm.
There's monks flying through the air. And they're not angels. They're not considered deities. They're
flying monks.
Still like lamas and monks flying through the air. So again, it's never the central part of the picture. And I wanted to show you some of the artwork here before we kind of close off this segment, just give you an example of what's in here. So here's one of the stories I'll quickly mention. I just lost my place in my notes. Good timing. Yeah,
it's always the way.
This one is an example of a set. There's 22 apparently pieces in this set. And this one depicts a Buddha in full flight, which we can zoom in.
We're at the top there?
Yeah, you can zoom in. There he is. There's one there.
And one on the left too?
That's a little crop of it. No, apparently there's just one flying there.
Okay.
But this is the story of the monk that was incredibly fat.
Oh.
So that's the Buddha flying. That's the Buddha.
So what's in the water? Is he going down to eat fish?
I'm not sure. But one of his disciples was incredibly fat. And they're all like, dude, why are you so fat? They keep making fun of him. And as I said at the start of the show, They even went to the Buddha and said, "What's the deal? This guy just can't lose weight," because he tried everything.
Yeah.
Like he was taking all the pills, he was on the diets, he took
Ozempic.
powders, did it, Ozempic,
Buddhist Ozempic.
he did everything, and he was still just like an obese fatty. And so then the Buddha was like, "Yeah, he was a sea monster in a past life."
So is this karma? Is that what this is?
I love that in the story, the disciples are like, "Yeah, what? Sure." Like they don't even believe their master. So Buddha grabs one of the disciples, and this is what this painting is depicting. He's actually taking him to the beach and saying, "See how
there's two of them.
See how he's carrying the monk, and if you look down on the beach here, there's bones." And so the Buddha's like, "See those bones? That's his old body. He was a fat sea monster, and he was so greedy he kept eating, and now he has this pathology in his next incarnation."
Clearly, he improved his karma, because it's like obviously a step up to go from being a fat sea monster to now just being a fat person.
Apparently, the Buddha explained that he was a particularly virtuous sea monster.
Well, there you go.
I don't know how you gain virtue when you're a sea monster.
Look at the Loch Ness Monster. He's working hard.
Like, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
See?
Wait, isn't he like a conjured demon?
Well, I mean...
Isn't he like a sex magic demon? Isn't the Loch Ness Monster?
Allegedly. But you know what? We shouldn't pigeonhole the poor guy.
Yeah.
You know,
but what do you do if you're a whale and you want to gain favor for your next life? What do you do? Like only eat the evil fish?
Yes.
What do you? Is that it?
That's exactly
right. You just eat the communist fish.
Salmon.
Yeah, fucking salmon.
The worst. They're redistributing wealth and just like,
literally the worst. Yeah. Salmon. Delicious though. So yeah, that's that story. I wanted to tell you about the mischievous flyer Pindola Bharadvaja. So this was the Arhat Pindola Bharadvaja. This guy was cheeky. So once he was speaking in public about the rumors of flying abilities, like someone asked him about it, and he said to the crowd, he's like, "Look, you guys really think this is special to be able to fly around?" And people in the crowd he was lecturing to said, "Yeah, it's amazing." So he was like, "All right, watch and learn." And he starts whizzing around, flying around the crowd. And while he was doing this, showing off his flight, he also like unlocked the third eye of members in the audience, made them see into other dimensions, and some of them could tell the future and some of them were momentarily clairvoyant and did all these things. And this obviously created a bit of a stir, and at the time his master was the Buddha, and he got in a lot of trouble. The Buddha scolded him and said, "You're never to do that again. You know, that's not what this practice is about. This is an enlightenment doctrine to raise ethics and spiritual values. We're not here to entertain crowds."
Yep.
So he got reprimanded by the Buddha, but he didn't learn his lesson, because there's another account of this guy. This is him on the screen here. I'll just flash that up momentarily. And he had a very handsome face, and women were deeply drawn to him because of his strong masculine features, according to the story. And on one occasion, he was invited by a king to lecture at the royal palace, and one of his discourses was delivered to a group of 500 noble women. So an auditorium packed with the finest females in the kingdom. And they were just hanging on every word this guy had to say. Like, he had the audience wrapped around his little finger. And they actually asked him, in question time, they asked him, like, what can we give you as offerings? What can we give you, your hermitage, as an offering? And he replied, he's like, "Look, we're well cared for, but, we got plenty of food and medicine." But he had this kind of sly grin on his face, and he's like, "Yeah, some of our monks need new robes." And he says, "If you could donate all your clothing, we could remake
what a
it
pervert.
into robes for the monks."
Oh, no. You can just all donate it here. Is that what happened?
500 noble ladies, according to the story, start to disrobe in this lecture hall and pile all their dresses and garments into this huge pile in front of him. And they're like, just like standing there giggling. And I love this story because you look at this guy, look at his face. Yeah. He's like, as if this guy wouldn't do that. Look at the smirk on his face. And that's how they've portrayed him historically with that story. I love that. He's like, yeah.
He's literally getting a third eyeful. So did he not reincarnate after that?
Well, apparently there's all these, picture it, he's up there on the lecture cushion. There's 500 naked noble women in front of him. And the king walks in. And the king's like, what the hell is going on here? And the king is obviously furious and ends up charging him and threatening to have him tied to an anthill and executed. And this guy, with that cheeky grin on his face, snaps his fingers and disappears into thin air.
You just hear like a giggle or a laugh on the wind.
He just teleports out of there. But once again, the Buddha got news of what he did and he got scolded, and I think he got grounded permanently. I think he got his ability to fly taken away from him. So that's that Arhat. I thought that was a good story.
It's a great story.
And then you have, which I think is getting to the crux of the smartiness of Tibetan Buddhism, right? So this next one depicts two of they're called Mahasiddhas, and they're kind of like, you can kind of see them up the top there. They're kind of like accomplished, they're not quite Buddhas, like they're accomplished monks, right? And they're in full flight, they're levitating, flying through the air. The one on the left is Gantapada, and the one on the right is Jalanda Ripa.
Are they having sex on the left?
Well, one of them
making
is.
something?
Geez, slow down, buddy.
Making whoopee?
Slow down. They lived in the 10th and 11th century, so these are real historical people. We know about them from history. Very important to the new schools of Tibetan Buddhism. And I'm looking at this beautiful painting, just thinking, oh yeah, they're floating through the air. Like one of them's got his consort, and he's having sex with her in the air. But who's this guy down the bottom with the dog?
Oh my God.
What's this guy doing? Is he just like a local who's looking up and is like, okay.
Why does the dog have a smile on its face?
I get to see a show today, but no. There he is.
Surely that's not.
Shall we zoom in and read the caption, Aaron? Let's zoom in and read the caption. What is he doing with this animal?
I just caught a glimpse of it.
This is Kukaripa practicing tantric sex with a bitch.
Literally.
I'm reading verbatim from the ancient historical text.
See the corruption of it's supposed to be something which is pious and a chastity, and people are screwing dogs.
Oh, this amazing holy spiritual practice of Tibetan Buddhism. Oh, next page is a guy having sex with a dog. Okay.
Is that actually some type of deity though?
Well, yeah, this guy, he's another.
Not that I'm excusing it.
Yeah, he is another accomplished master. He's looking on from below. The dog at his side identifies him as the eccentric master Kukaripa. The great Mahasiddha Naropa once sent his Tibetan disciple Marpa to study with this man. And so we have a bit of a historical story. And this guy Naropa explained that, look, I spent some time with Kukaripa, and he's ugly. He's hideous. He has a head. It's like looking at a dude with a head of a monkey attached to a human body. He's like the most ugly man I've ever seen, right? This is the disciple that went to train with him.
Mm-hmm.
And Naropa laughed and he said, look, he's so ugly, he couldn't even find a human consort, so he had to do his tantric sex practices with a dog. And Marpa, the guy that sent his disciple to practice with this guy, is shocked. And his disciple that went to have watch this dog sex guy said, look, this is what makes him so great though. He's no one can equal him. He can obtain spiritual perfection with an animal. He doesn't even need a human woman.
Okay, there's no spiritual perfection coming from screwing a dog. No matter how enlightened you are.
Here's how they get out of it though. Here's how the kind of Tibetan Buddhism backpedals a little bit. They're like, well, actually, going back to the story we heard earlier, the bitch was no ordinary dog, but an emanation of the Queen of Dakinis herself. She only looked like a dog to people with low Denpa Perma, or whatever it was called, that thing that we're all lacking.
The thing is, though, he'd previously used that excuse when he was caught screwing a donkey. So
another account states that he was so ugly he could only get an equally ugly consort. So maybe this is a twisting on the historical story, because they say the consorts he ended up with was so ugly, if you saw them in the wrong light and from the wrong angle, they actually look like a dog.
Oh, a Two-Face.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the story of that guy. So to explain that a little bit, right? This is how they practice, and this is what isn't really publicly talked about with Tibetan Buddhism. Part of the practice, the Tantric practice, is sex magic. It's literally sitting down with a woman, having sex, and that is part of some kind of goal they're trying to achieve.
But that's not entirely true.
What do you mean?
It's not always a woman.
That's true. Yeah, sometimes.
That's what just highlighted.
Sometimes the woman's not available. So obviously this is controversial. But you can find information on it. Like there are a few former Tibetan nuns who are Westerners who have written tell-alls about their time with, like, maybe not the Dalai Lama, but those circles, who basically said, yeah, we were used as kind of
sex slaves,
sex objects.
Yeah.
But
aren't they supposed to? I mean, they're supposed to be chaste, aren't they? Isn't that part of it?
Well, that's Buddhism, but this isn't Buddhism. It's Tibetan Buddhism.
Right.
And so part of the idea, as far as I understand it, is that so
it's Buddhism after dark.
What they're trying to do is supplement yin and yang, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is men have yang and women have yin, and by supplementing the other factor, you're essentially, when yin and yang combine, you're creating this spiritual energy. That's the idea. And
walk through a tunnel.
And it's supposed to be disciplined. So the idea is you would never partake in that practice if you still had any attachment to desire or lust. So it's almost like they're doing it, maybe not in a robotic fashion, but they don't have the typical desires that you and I or some layperson would have. They don't think of it as some kind of sexy time. It's just, okay, it's like we're sitting down to do this thing, and it's very serious and very solemn. That's their take on it. If you listen to some critics of it, especially like traditional Buddhist practitioners, they're like, no, this is disgusting. This is gross. It's completely inappropriate. It goes against everything in Buddhism. And when you see images like that, you're kind of like, well, maybe they got a point. I don't know if that was ever preached in the traditional sutras.
I find it strange that it would even be made into art anyway in the first place.
Yes, bizarre.
Like, is this a form of pornography? Like Tibetan?
It's just bizarre. Like, maybe it's just like a funny story in their culture, and they think it's funny, so they draw it. It might be a humor thing that we don't get.
Is it misrepresented? Like, is it?
Well, the thing is, you see other stories like this. So this is another image of that guy, Gantapada, floating in the sky while making love with his tantric consort. And according to one account, Gantapada was a celibate monk. So again, living the nice celibate, upright life in a monastery in eastern India. And the local king was like, screw this guy, I don't like him. So the local king ended up sending his hottest consort to try and tempt the monk. But the plan backfired, and the monk ended up falling in love with the consort's daughter and ran away with her. They ended up leaving and finding a hut in the forest and trying to escape the king. So obviously the king got extremely angry. And this is how the story goes. He rushed to Gantapada's forest hermitage with the intent to confront him and have him stoned to death. Gantapada, however, was unperturbed and responded with a smile. He then took his wife in his arms, entered into sexual union with her, and then the both of them levitated into the sky. As he left, he kicked over his wine jug and it struck the earth forcefully, causing a giant flood, which is depicted in this painting here.
Oh, so it's a sex levitation flood myth.
Yes, it is. That's a very good way to put it. It is a sex levitation revenge flood myth.
Because flood myth, comes up in so many cultures. I just have never seen it from the angle of sex levitation before.
But see,
what's the little goblin things down there?
The goblin thing.
Down there on the bottom right-hand side. Is it? I thought, no, okay, it's just another person.
Just some guy jerking off in the corner.
Yeah.
This This is Avalokitesvara who put a stop to the flood. That's according to the story. So all's well that ends well. But this seemed to be the trend. I realized as I was going
What's
through...
with the creepy demon just sitting there with his cup of tea watching on? He's like, yes. Up in the right-hand corner there.
Well, that's the thing. It's all like voyeuristic. Like, if you go... Let's just go through some of the images here. And you'll start to notice...
like it's plus content.
You'll start to notice a trend. It's just like, okay, we're flying through the air having sex. And then I saw this one and I was like, what is she holding? What is that? What's going to happen to this guy?
14 inches of pain, that's what that is.
That is a giant, big purple... oh, no, it's a scroll.
Is it, though?
It's a funny-shaped scroll.
What's with the weird...
But, of course, this is about levitation because there's this guy in the background levitating. As if that's... like, there's a guy about to get ramrodded in the foreground, but in the background, there's someone levitating. I don't know what's going on here. Is she holding her panties? Did she just take off her panties and she's flashing them at the voyeur?
It looks like...
And why is there dismembered people in the background here?
See, it looks like meat. So is she eating people?
I don't know. What's this girl in the tree doing?
Oh my God.
What is going on? Tibet? And like, who's this dude with a giant erection playing a flute?
The pied penis piper.
And again, you just got all this consorting going on over here. There's a bit of consorting going over there.
Rumpy pumpy ricochet.
This guy's on his phone.
Yeah.
While he's having sex. He's like posting on Twitter.
Or OnlyFans.
And you just start, I don't even want to think about what's going on in this image. Like, again, this chick in the tree, like she's had enough.
What's with that though?
I don't know what's going on.
And this weird like Grover Scorpion or what is that? Gosmo? No, what's that character out of Sesame Street? The Muppets.
Gonzo.
That's a Gonzo Scorpion. Look at it.
It does look like Gonzo.
Big eaten by an eagle by the looks of it.
Look at this guy. She's high-fiving a tiger while they're flying through the air having sex. That pretty much sums
She's
up.
not into it.
You don't reckon?
No.
She's a bit embarrassed. Again, more consorting.
Why are they always holding something though? Look at that.
Yeah, he's on his iPhone. He's holding this weird disc.
What's she handing? Is it like I don't even know what it is.
She's showing him her Instagram profile and he's got his sword out and he's like, gross. Get away from me. Bit of race mixing going on a tiger. Why not? And more consorting. So it's basically, like I said earlier, it's like flying through the air having sex.
And is the implication that by having sex that allows you to levitate, that's the only way?
Well, this is all part of their practice. Look at this one.
What's happening here?
Look at this guy.
It feels a little bit...
What is this? Is this Epstein's Island?
Yeah.
What's going on here? There's a guy flying through the air with his consort over his shoulder. And are they eating sushi off this naked chick?
Yes.
They're eating sushi off her.
There's a lot of fish perversion going on here.
What's going on? What is she doing?
And there's like a bowl of tits or something up the top.
A bowl of tits. Yeah, that's the appetizer. There's a big bowl of tits. That was my face all day trying to do this bloody segment.
Yeah, it's yeah, I was thinking, what a beautiful coffee table art book that I could get. Like, no, I don't want it, thanks.
That's the book. The Flying Tibetan Mystics.
Some dickhead. How much is that book? Do you know? Because obviously it's going to be
$400.
Someone's like, oh, you're linked to a book that was $100. Okay, we don't sell the book. It's not a house.
Yeah, someone commented on YouTube, like this really snarky comment, like, oh, you're linked to the book and it's $100. It's like, what are you, a fucking peasant?
It's not that. It's like we have no control over the price of the book.
Yeah, it's like it's not like you have to buy it. We're just, if you want it, it's there. It's just, that's why we do the show, so we can tell you about the expensive book.
Well, this one, yeah, I think, yeah, we'll just leave that one to the side. It's not really something you order out at the time.
If this
Look
is
at that.
If this is the first time you've been exposed to the weirdness, like this guy's got an interesting story. This guy fled Tibet when he was 8. Don't blame him for that, obviously, but then he landed in the UK and then he rose to the ranks of like a spiritual master in the UK as a Tibetan Lama. But there's all these connections with drugs and sex
that the book is
and
called
LSD.
Sex and Violence in Tibetan Buddhism. I mean,
yeah, the Dalai Lama came to see him and everything. In the end, they realized he's just a dude wearing robes. He doesn't know anything about Buddhism. He just like made it all. He just made it all up. The only thing is that he's Tibetan. That's it. I think he just read everything. He's like us. He just read everything off the internet.
He was like, oh, that sounds like it's real.
It's like you or me going to the UK and starting a cult.
I should do that.
So this one, I'll just quickly mention, this will be in the show notes as well. This is from Xiao Ping Shi. It's called Behind the Facade of Tibetan Tantra. There's 2 volumes. This guy's written 1,000 pages pulling apart all that kind of dirty stuff we just showed you and being really, really critical of how it is against the traditional tenets of Buddhism, how it's not actually Buddhism. It's something else entirely. It's become completely twisted and disgusting.
I can't recall if we read it or it was in a documentary or something, but there was some suggestion that it was like there's like an evil force that's kind of corrupted the origins of this stuff, and like that's why like people have gone down this path. But it's like it's this esoteric kind of idea.
Well, speaking of the guy with the dog, he's pulling out passages from the text where they're talking about, you know, it's totally okay if you're with an animal or your sister or your mother, as long as it's in the strict rites of the practice.
It's amazing what you can justify through your belief system, isn't it?
Gross. Anyway, we'll link to that.
Thanks for that, Ben. That's great.
Thanks for listening.
Really
That's
good.
a wrap for this show. Sign up for Plus, mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. Sign up today. Get access to the big extensions we do on these shows every single week. Huge stuff coming up after the break from Aaron. We're going to be looking at, what do you got over there?
We're going to be looking at the glittering portals of, and what do we call it? Not portals. It was the pillars, I'm sorry. The glittering pillars, triangle pillars of Karelian. So we're also going to be looking at UFOs. We're going to be diving into some strange reports of there apparently being an alien base directly in the Northern Territory, which is being remote viewed by some of the leading people in the field.
That's right.
Yes, and it suggests that the program itself is operating directly out of Australia.
Cool. mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. Sign up today. Get access to the big extensions we do every single Friday. And of course, Plus members get an exclusive show every single Tuesday as well. So you're getting more than double the content if you sign up for Plus. Again, check it out, mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. That's a wrap for this free edition of the show. Thanks for listening. If you're on Plus, stick around for the great stuff after the break. For everyone else, we'll catch you next week.